That was a nice introduction, and I think it sets the stage perfectly for what I'm going to show you. Okay. So good morning, everybody. Martin Mendez from Gallo Winery. Pleasure to be here to share some of these results with you. And like I said, Thibaut did a wonderful introduction of why do we need to start looking at winter rainfall levels. I'll show you a little bit more detail that comes out of, in this case, my PhD thesis and a project that we started back in 2009. And I remember actually going around within Gallo back in 2008 when we were thinking about doing this project, and people were looking at me like, well, why do we need to do this type of research? There's plenty of water, and it rains pretty good. It seems kind of like we're jumping the gun a little bit, but look where we are now, right? So I think it is a statement also to the way the company allocates resources and tries to anticipate potential issues that are going to come later on. So I am going to walk you through these results, and then I want to take a couple minutes to talk about our current water conditions in the state, which are, as all of you know, perhaps not the best. And then I want to try to explain you how we're using this basic information on a large scale, at a vineyard level, but on a multiple vineyard basis. So let's go at it. And what I have here is a picture of our the first year where we did this experiment. We basically tarped a vineyard. This was a vineyard in Madera County, so very sandy soils. This is a Merlot vineyard, by the way. We installed that tarp right after harvest, and we left it through the winter. Right before bud break, right before the buds started to swollen, we basically removed it, and then we left the vineyard uncovered. If you notice, see if I can point here at you, you'll see an area here that is a lot greener, right? And that is basically what we're comparing our covered or tarp treatment against. Because we wanted to have a comparison, normal rainfall versus no rainfall, which is a very extreme situation, obviously, but we wanted to make sure that we actually achieve normal rainfall when we want it. Sometimes you do research and you end up hitting the driest year ever, so therefore you don't have a really good treatment to compare against. So that way we install micro sprinklers that we run outside this tarp area to make the soil moist as it will be on a normal year. And granted that all the years that we did this experiment were already kind of drier than normal, so we were running the sprinklers quite a bit to really maintain the soil moist. So this is published, by the way, in the Australian Journal of Agriculture and Enology, so you guys can go there and get all the information, even more than what I'm going to show you today, and get a better explanation, more detailed analysis as well. So starting with vine growth, what we saw is exactly what Thibaut was describing, a reduction on shoot growth. Keep in mind that as the season started, the vines started to grow. We had a threshold for leaf water potential to start irrigation of around 10, 11 bars, midday, of course, leaf water potential. So all the vines were irrigated, right? It wasn't like we covered the vines and then we didn't water them. We actually watered them. They're all drip irrigated, right? But one of the issues with drip irrigation is that we only wet a small portion of the soil. So it doesn't really replenish or account for the lack of winter rainfall. When it rains, needless to say, you're wetting the entire soil profile. When you run the drip, you're only wetting a very small section of it. So what we saw from year number one is a significant reduction on shoot growth, and that's what is described there. On the left-hand side, the picture at the bottom, those are the vines that did not have winter rainfall. The picture on top, those are the normal rainfall vines. So you can see a very significant decrease on shoot growth, also shown on the two graphs on the right-hand side. In terms of yield, we also saw a significant effect in yield, even in year number one, right? And so that was kind of a surprise. We expected to see a significant decrease in yield, but we didn't expect to see that much of an impact. In year number one, we had about a 40% reduction in yield. And again, I want to point out that we were watering these vines. We were actually following an 80% regulated deficit irrigation, so it wasn't really, stressed a lot. It was really just 80%. And even though we did that, we saw a 40% decrease in yield. So when you look at the yield components, and I want to point your attention to a couple of things. When you look at vine yield, so we got a reduction average for the 2 years of 35%, so 40% the first year, about 30% the second year, so average kind of 35%. What we also saw is that the pruning weights actually were a lot more, the effect on pruning weight was even stronger. So we got a 55% reduction in pruning weights. So that created basically a severe lack of balance in those vines that had the tiny shoots ended up with a lot of clusters, and even though the berries were smaller, they had lower yield. In terms of balance, they were a lot less balanced than the normal rainfall treatment, so to speak. So the effect on growth basically is a lot more significant than the effect on yield, which creates really a severe problem in terms of lack of balance. And as a take-home message, basically one of the things we learned is on years where we have like on winter rainfall, we're going to have to do a lot more cluster thinning, right, to actually go back to a more balanced situation in terms of leaves that we have versus number of clusters we have. It's an issue that is actually it's seen very, very significantly here in California because of the good weather conditions we had during the spring for cluster primordia differentiation. So we have a lot of good bud fruitfulness. We end up with vines that have a lot of clusters. Kind of, I'm sure some of you are thinking also what happens when you mechanize, a vineyard. You end up with a lot of clusters, and sometimes if you're not careful, you have too many clusters, you have a lack of balance, too much fruit for the growth that you have in your vines. This is sort of similar, right? So the amount of leaves you have is basically not enough to maintain the crop. And that is shown as well in terms of fruit quality. The first year we saw sort of maybe a slightly positive response in some of these indices. The second year it wasn't nearly the case. In terms of bricks, there were no differences. You can see all the indicators, basic indicators that we use. Unfortunately, I don't know how, but the table got a little bit mixed up. There's things like color all the way at the bottom. The first year, again, we got maybe a little bit of a positive effect, but overall, as we continue doing the experiment, and I'm just showing you the first 2 years, but we actually repeated this for 4 years, and every single year the effect got worse and worse, basically, right? So we were getting more into a situation where we had more significant loss of vine balance. One of the reasons why we did the experiment was because we were interested in understanding how this lack of rainfall affects methoxyparacin, so green characters. We were very concerned back in 2008. In some of our vineyards, we were getting a lot of bell pepper characteristics in our Merlot and Cabernet vineyards, and we were trying to understand how potential droughts during the winter will affect this. And what we saw is a significant decrease on synthesis of methoxyparacin. As you can see in these two curves, the black dots are the normal rainfall treatment. The graphs are divided between pre-veraison and post-veraison. So you get a lot more accumulation on your berries of methoxyparacin green belt characters when you have normal rainfall versus the treatment that had no rainfall. And even we got to harvest with higher levels of methoxyparacin on the fruit as well. So really, what happens during the winter is it's a clear example of, one thing that Tigo was alluding to. What happens during the winter, what happens during the spring is really affecting, fruit quality all the way to harvest, right? In terms of wine sensory and again wine balance, I say this a couple of times, but we really over time we see a lot of a loss of wine balance, and you can see how the fruit to pruning mass ratio there, especially in 2010, we got a 15 value for the wines that had no rainfall and an 8.6 for the ones that had normal rainfall, right? So when you look at sensory analysis, the first year we were able to basically get fruit and wines, actually this is wine, wines that were a little bit less green on the no rainfall treatment, and that was perceived as an improvement. But then what happened in year number 2 and so on is where we're getting a lot less fruity characters as well on the fruit. We were just not able to ripen the fruit, basically. We were going to have to leave the fruit even longer on the vines. We were going to get into a situation where we're actually having to use a lot more hang time or extended maturation to achieve the quality that we were looking for. So definitely, one of the things we learned is in years like that, we're having to basically do a lot more cluster thinning earlier to promote vine balance. So I'm going to leave it as that, and I expect to maybe hear some questions from you guys on that, but I do want to spend a few minutes analyzing what's going on in California. And what I'm showing here, most of you have seen it, is the US drought monitor, right? On the left, you have where we were in March 2013 and where we are now, March 10, 2015. So in 2 years, basically, we've gone to a point where about 80% of the state is under severe drought. And it's on the news every single day, so I don't need really to repeat this, but it's a very nice way of seeing, what the state is in terms of water resources for the state of California. The other thing that is even more concerning, at least from my opinion, on looking at a grape supply perspective and water allocation, right? So, probably regulations that are going to come down the pipe from the state in terms of allowing growers to use groundwater or to allow for new well drilling, for example, is the lack of snowfall that we have seen in the last few years. What I have here is expressed as normal levels for this day, March 12 versus average, right? So last year, we're actually worse than last year, just to summarize it mildly. So we have even less snowfall than we had last year, and we are roughly speaking, about 15% of average. Let me say that again, 15% of average is snowfall. Right? So when you look at reservoir levels and all that, you driven through the few reservoirs that we have across the state, and you've seen how empty they are. Not having snowfall, how is that going to affect us as growers, basically, in terms of allocation levels coming from the state, right? And the percentages that are of allocation that are already advertised there are 0, or in best cases 15% for some areas through the state. So how are we leveraging all these? Because at the end of the day, this is all great. It's all good basic information, basic research, I call it. But how are we leveraging these across all our vineyards as a large company that we are? We got to find ways to extrapolate these to all our growers and to really help our growers understanding how are their vineyards performing this year versus last year versus historical averages, right? And there's some things that we can do and that we already do internally at Gallo to work not just with our vineyards but with every single grower that we purchase fruit from. And for that we use remote sensing, right? So remote sensing is a good way to estimate, I would say rather quickly, a few indices that maybe help you understand what's going on with your vineyards, like I say, this year versus last year versus 5 years ago, right? So we use a lot of satellite and airborne imagery. We purchase a lot of imagery throughout the state, and we run a bunch of probably complex set of models, algorithms, but I'm not going to bore you to death with any of that. But this is information that we distribute to all our growers, and I just want to point out one one basic example of a tool we have for growers, and it's just a simple vegetation index, which I'm sure you've seen to death, but sometimes we, growers are given only a screenshot, maybe a single pass per year of this type of information, and it's really not that useful unless you have something to compare against, right? And in this case, I'm showing you 2 different years, 2013, 2014, of a property that we own actually that is about probably 15 miles away from where we are today. And when you look at these, obviously the darker the colors, the greener the blue, the more vigorous your vineyards are. And you look at this, and the first thing that some of you might be thinking is, well, how is that working out? Because 2013, you have quite a bit of green and a little bit of yellow, and then in 2014, which was a very, very dry winter, very dry year, you have a lot more green, right? So here's where remote sensing is never gonna replace the need to actually talk to growers and to go and spend time in the field looking at what's going on out there on the vines. So what happened last year is that we did get a severe reduction in yield on all these vineyards. And as the vines had a low yield, we started watering really, and we actually pushed growth. So we end up in a situation where we have more growth, not because of the lack of rainfall, but because we didn't have enough crop in our vines, right? So when you start looking at all that picture, right, and you start talking to our growers, and you can imagine the number of meetings that we have almost every week with growers to actually share this information and get their feedback to try to understand what do these colors really mean? Why do we see these differences from year to year? That's when these things start to make a little bit more sense. But at the end of the day, one of the products that we have for our grower relations, field reps, and growers, something that looks like this. And I don't know how the colors look there, probably not that good. You're going to have to trust me here. It looks a lot better on the screen, actually, on my screen at least. We do this on a regional level, right? So we don't do just this in a single vineyard, in a single property. We're looking at all our vineyards through a region, and in some cases we might be looking at other crops as well, if needed, to understand how things are growing this year versus last year versus 5 years ago. And again, once you start pulling this data, and you can probably maybe kind of see there that there's 2 colors, either blue or red. So all the orchards that are colored in blue basically are orchards we see actually an increase, or at least not a decrease in growth, right? And this was collected early on last year. All the ones that are showing in red are the ones that we are seeing a significant decrease in growth. And so that's where it becomes a little bit more meaningful. Again, getting this information in the hands of our growers, and to do that, we had to basically develop from scratch a mobile platform to have all these applications on a mobile device. Could be an iPhone or an iPad, so you don't have to print out 100 maps and walk around trying to make sense out of all these, right? So I'm going to leave it as that. I think I probably went a little bit over time, and I'd like to answer any questions that you guys might have. Thank you again, Thibaut and Virgin, for inviting me. Pleasure to be here. Yes. Yeah, so the question is if I've seen any difference on the pH of the soils when we covered that soil on the experiment in Madeira. We haven't seen really a difference on pH there. We were tracking a lot of different things on soil to understand, why are these differences, right? So why are we seeing what we're seeing? So we tracked other things like, for example, soil temperature. One concern that I had when I tarp these vines is, am I hitting the soil too much, and I'm gonna make those vines push because of that heat? And we didn't see that either, other than in the first inch. And I don't think we proved that that's significant enough to actually cause an effect. But let me maybe try to answer your question on a different, maybe try to spin it around a little bit. What we are seeing in vineyards on growing regions, maybe like the Central Coast, where we haven't had enough winter rainfall for a few years, is we're seeing more and more salinity issues, right? So there's not enough leaching in some cases because you're not getting rainfall, and that is indirectly affecting the soil pH. So we didn't see it in the experiment, But in normal conditions, basically, in not commercial vineyards, we're seeing that almost every year, especially in areas like this, and also it's very critical in the west side of Fresno County. We're seeing a lot of issues with salinity in the soil because of the lack of rainfall. Yes. On Sunnybrook, you say what you said. So low fruit set and irrigation, which created higher fruiting weight ratio. Correct. And the results you're telling us from this year of what you would have done differently. I guess I'm trying to grasp that. It is not trying to hold the line bigger to what you were seeing. What's said? I hear what you're saying. Yeah. You're going to go back and adjust it. Correct. Yeah, so the question is, well, there's a couple of questions there, but at a high level is, okay, so how do we, what did we do last year in that commercial vineyard where we saw higher NDVI, yeah, one thing that we will do different, that we are going to do different this year is really hold back on turning the water on a little bit, right? I think we got a little bit scared because of the lack of winter rainfall, and we were watering just too early. And then we saw also, all of a sudden we started seeing a lot of issues with fruit set. We have a lot of Merlot vineyards there, and it happened to be fairly warm also around bloom. We had a heat spike around bloom, really. I attribute that, among other things, the drought as well. But we ended up with not enough clusters, bunches in our vines, not enough yield, basically. We started irrigating too early, then we pushed growth, basically, right? So even though it was a dry year, we saw that difference from what we did last year versus what we had seen 2 years back. And what are we going to do this year is we're going to be really, really careful when we turn the water on. The problem there also is, it's a great question, and we could talk forever about this, but it's, we're lacking very good methods for forecasting how much fruit is there, right? Especially early on. So, those is easy now to say what you will have done different. But, okay, when we're going through bloom and fruit set, and I need a really good, accurate estimation of how many bunches I have, and how many clusters, and what my yield prediction is going to be for that year, we're still kind of struggling a little bit on a vineyard level, right? So we go and do a lot of, at Gallo we do a lot of bud dissections the winter before, and then through the season we do on bunch counts, and we count berries, and we do a lot of that. But on a large scale, I'm still struggling with the accuracy of those measurements. Sometimes we get to harvest and we find out that, well, we thought that we were going to have 6 tons and we only have 4. Or the other way around, we thought that we were going to have 6 and we have 10, which is even worse. So the old school then would be this year less buds to try to balance the lines back out. Right. Is that what you did this year, or are you kind of now changing technology based on this? So yeah, no, I think you hit it on the head. So it all starts at pruning time, right? So we were kind of trying to anticipate, and we did leave a little bit fewer buds because I think we were anticipating that otherwise we were going to end up on that situation. See, it's a problem that when you go, when you travel around and you go places like Australia or even France, the conditions here, especially light conditions here in the spring and temperature conditions, are so perfect for cluster primordial differentiation. We end up with vines that are loaded with clusters, right? That doesn't happen in other weather conditions, right? So it's kind of like playing against us for that particular reason. Great question, though. Yeah, on the back. Question about the data you showed about truth. Obviously, you guys have a lot of quantify what that was related to all the time. Yep. Right. So the question is, if I can summarize it, is on the graphs that I show for methoxyparacin development, is it did we get lower methoxypyrazine levels on fruit because just rainfall, or there were other conditions like microclimate, light exposure, and so on. And you're 100% right. It's not just because of the lack of rainfall. The lack of rainfall basically induced, lower rates of shoot growth, and we had fruit that was more exposed on that treatment, definitely. And all that data is all included on the paper, actually, that is published in the Australian Journal. So I will encourage you to really take a look at that. There's definitely, that's the thing when working with methoxypyrazine, right? So there's so many variables there. In my opinion, I'll be 100% honest with you. More than anything, the differences that we saw in methoxypyrazine accumulation are attributed to lower vigor rate, and also indirectly more exposure to sunlight.
I've had some articles talk about shoot adder.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, kind of a follow-up question on vigor. So there's two more papers that I didn't present today, but they came out of my PhD thesis that basically target vigor especially. And again, I'm kind of summarizing. I'm putting everything, a bunch of things in one bag basically. But really, my conclusion is vine vigor definitely plays a role in methoxypyrazine synthesis. And more than vine vigor is really lack of balance. Either if you have too much fruit or you don't have enough fruit in your vines, you're going to have more methoxypyrazine, right? So undercropping also is, undercropping situations we've seen, and there's a few other papers in the literature from Mark Matthews, well back, and from people in Australia as well. Undercrop vines also have, produce fruit with higher levels of methoxypyrazine. So definitely there's vigor effects there, and there's, lack of vine balance, whatever that is for undercropping or overcropping. Great point. Thank you for all the questions. Really, really enjoyed it. Thank you again, Tivo.